Tim, do you remember when we had Linda Babcock on the show to talk about her book, The No Club?
Yeah, she talked a lot about women who are often the ones who are expected to take on this non-promotable work, right, inside corporations, and how important it is that they can learn to say no.
Yeah. Now, that was a few years ago, and you would think that because of her being a guest on this fantastic and super popular show with the thousands and thousands of people that heard her
all over the world,
all over the world, that and other issues that women face in the workplace, you'd think that those issues would no longer be a problem because it'd be solved because everybody heard about it, right? Isn't that right?
That might be a little hyperbolic. I wouldn't go quite that far.
Of course not. Of course not. Well, I'm sure the groovers out there that listen to it have definitely changed their ways. There are still so many challenges for women as they work in the workplace.
Yeah. So if you think about it, Kurt, both men and women are still working under some sort of cultural norms that basically say it's okay to behave that way, right? Men either consciously or unconsciously believe that, they're not hurting anybody to assign a woman on a team to get donuts for the group. And women are probably associating with another norm that says it's okay to not speak up when they see an opportunity to contribute something meaningful to a conversation.
Yeah. But Tim, what if it could be different?
Man, a dream that I would love to see come true.
What if this is a monstrous generalization here, so forgive me for that, but what if women could feel more empowered at work and their work behaviors were strong and confident and warm?
You mean like becoming a likable badass?
Likable is my catchy term for the warm dimension, and badass is my catchy term for assertiveness. And so it is a two-dimensional space, which means, yes, it is possible to be both. We know this is true because we know lots of people in our lives, women or not, who we would say that is a very capable person who is very caring.
Welcome to Behavioral Grooves, the podcast that explores our human condition. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. We are here to use a behavioral science lens to bring you insights into how to find your groove.
Our guest today is the remarkable Alison Fragale. She's not only the creator of the Likable Badass description you just heard, she's also a researcher and professor of organizational behavior, as well as the Mary Farley Ames Lee Distinguished Scholar at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill.
Kind of in my backyard here. Alison researches the way status, power, and influence appear in corporate settings. Before her teaching career, she was at McKinsey, working with some of the largest corporations in the world. So she comes to this topic with a combination of real-world and academic experience.
Her book is called Likable Badass, How Women Get the Success They Deserve, and it offers a very practical advice on how to increase their status through building a reputation as someone who is both warm and competent, rather than being forced into a trade-off. And it's very much aimed at women, but holds a lot of useful lessons for everyone. At least I took some very useful lessons out of this, Tim.
I totally agree on that. We thoroughly enjoyed our conversation with Alison, with Dr. Fragale, as we covered topics such as why it's important to become a likable badass and the not so subtle differences between power and status.
It was great information, and Tim, it was also a lot of fun. And let me say that, the conversation was...
what, shall we say, a bit irreverent at times?
Yeah, irreverent at times. That works. So now, Groovers, we invite you to sit back and relax with a badass pour of your favorite power-building cocktail and enjoy our conversation with Alison Fragale.
Alison Fragale, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
It's a pleasure. It's really fun to have you here today. And we are going to start with a speed round. So we need to know first and foremost, do you prefer coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Not 100%. Even a hesitation. I like it.
No.
Oh, 100%. No. Like no tea in your life?
The second my eyes open, which is very early in the morning, I'm an early riser, the first thing I think of is coffee. 100%. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I do like that. All right. Okay. Second speed round question. If you could have any superpower for an hour, What would that superpower be?
My answer to this is going to be lame. And it's particularly lame because I have 3 kids who have asked me this as recently as 3 days ago.
Oh my gosh.
And then I said fly. And I think that's a dumb answer because we already have planes where you could fly. So I don't know why I would need to fly. And I don't like flying, but that's what I picked. And then I'm like, I don't know, maybe like, that's all I got. It's not good. But do you have a good one? What would you have?
No. I mean, isn't there a difference between like you flying of your own volition versus like being in a plane or a helicopter or something? I think there's something innately different about that. I mean, I've had dreams of that, right? Where you have wings or something and you're able to fly. It feels like there would be a fundamental difference in that experience. And so I think that could be, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Or maybe is it a superpower that anytime you tell your kids to do something, they actually do it? Because if that's that I would actually pick that one more than
that would be a great. I mean, but it would only be for an hour. I mean, that's
I know, but I mean, I could get a lot of requests in 1 hour. I'd be like, challenge accepted.
Okay. Third speed round question. Is it possible that a serial apologizer can become a self-promoting, likable badass?
100%. Yes.
Yes.
And with or without the apologies, right? And ditching them is not a bad idea, but even if you keep them, you can become a self-promoting, likable badass.
All right. Well, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that later. So, Alison, if we asked you to come speak at our huge grooving conference in 2025 that has thousands and thousands of our listeners who don't know that they'll be attending yet because we've never had one, but we will, and that someday they'll all be attending,
sure.
Right? So you're going to come, and we ask you to speak at that. Would you want to have a keynote stage session or a fireside chat?
I do like them both, but I would say fireside chat for not the reason you might think, which is those tend to be done seated and I never get to wear comfortable shoes. So anything that I can do seated, it's the reason I gave up playing craps in Vegas because I am too old to have to stand and lose money. So if I'm going to lose money, I'm going to do it in a cushy leather chair. So fireside chat.
Which is okay. And so what's the better way to lose money in Vegas? What's the more comfortable position? What games would you play that give you a comfortable position?
So anything where I could sit in a seat. I'd lose money at blackjack. I would lose money playing pai gow poker, which is my morning gambling. I used to lose money playing, or I not always lose money. Sometimes win money playing poker, live poker. I tend to not do that anymore. It's pretty antisocial. Anything with a seat. But there's things in my middle age I do not do anymore. I do not stand to lose money. I do not stand at a bar or stand in line to get into a bar. Like there's a bar in Chicago where we have to make reservations. And I said, now we're talking because I can actually walk in and know in that bar, there is a seat waiting for me. So fireside chat, seated.
And I like that you had a specific, Vegas game that you did in the morning. That I think it's kind of brushed over there, but very important to note.
Oh, okay. But Alison, we are happy that you're joining us today. We are here to talk about your book. Why should we want to be a likable badass?
Okay, great question. Likable badass is my catchy term for how people get status. And status is how much we're respected and regarded by other people. So when we're a likable badass, people value us, they respect us, and that ends up being really important for our quality of life. So if you've ever been in a situation where you felt like disrespected, you felt devalued, you felt overlooked, those are bad feelings. And they're bad for everybody because status is a fundamental human need. It's something all human beings seek, and life is better with it than without it. And so the likable badass is my nod. We can get into it, but it's my nod to how these decisions are made. The more technical psychological term is the interpersonal circumflex of person perception. Although I did fear that if that was the title of the book, it wouldn't have been very successful. So likable badass.
You're right.
Yeah.
And that's okay, right? But we should parse some of this out. And I think the first thing that I wanted to talk about is the difference that you distinguish between power and status. Can you just highlight those a little bit for our listeners?
Absolutely. So status is how much other people respect and regard you. Power is you control resources that are valuable. So a resource could be my money or the car keys for my teenager. It could be in a workplace context. It could be, I have the ability to give you a good or bad performance evaluation, to put you up for promotion or not, to hire and fire, to spend the budget. Anytime I can control a resource that's valuable, often just an authority to say yes or no, that is our power. And so they are related, because you think, oh, okay, I can think of people I really respect and they control a lot of stuff. And so in that sense, that power and status goes hand in hand, but they don't have to be. So you can think about people who control resources and they're not very respected. And you can also think about people who are highly respected, but they're not in charge of anything that matters to you, but you do value them quite a bit. So they're distinct. And that distinction is, in my opinion, important. I shouldn't say in my opinion, but in evidence is important, because status, which we don't talk about as much, and we have to define, right? Because we don't always know what it is. Status makes it easier for us to get power. Power is equally important. It's also a fundamental human need. We want it. All human beings do. They want to have control, autonomy. But status makes it easier for us to get power. And I think the easiest way to think about that is if you were sitting with somebody and that person wanted you to give them resources. You were going to hire them and they were going to have authority to do things, or you were going to go work for them. And they were going to be able to tell you what to do. So they would have control over you. Would you ever, if you had a choice, voluntarily choose to engage in that relationship, give that person power if you thought, I don't really respect that person very much? No. Most of the time when people have power, it's not because they've stolen the resources. It's because someone's given it to them in the context that we tend to talk about, right? Someone's given it to you. And people don't give resources to people they don't think are going to use them well. So in order for us to have control, to be able to advance in our careers, to be able to live the life we want to live, status ends up being a really important prerequisite. So that's where I think the distinction is really important, is because if people jump to give me the promotion, give me the title, give me the power, give me the pay, and they don't understand the underlying concept of status, they could be in a situation where they're fighting for it very unsuccessfully. No one's giving it to them, and they don't really understand what's holding them back.
Yeah. Alison, the subtitle to your book, so your book is Likable Badass, How Women Get the Success That They Deserve. And much of the book is focused in on women and the kind of historical way that they have not necessarily had the power or maybe the status. So can you talk a little bit about when you think about power and status, and particularly as it relates to women, what are some of those factors that are driving some of that element that's going on?
Yeah. So I'll back up. I'll answer a question you didn't ask me, but just a little bit of the behind the scenes. I wrote this book for women. There was definitely a conversation that I shut down very quickly in the process of coming up with the idea for this book of why is this a book for women? And men who have read it have said that to me, and I see it as very complimentary because it is a fundamental psychology. But I said, this is my audience. This is the audience I want to speak to. And if there's good stuff in it that gives people an edge, isn't it cool that the women get to read about it first? And so I said, if I don't write it, it doesn't get written. So don't tell me to write for anybody else. That's what I'm doing. But it is fundamentally something everybody contends with at times. Why do I think it's a particular concern for women is because gender is one of several ascribed status characteristics. That's another, psychologist term. But what it means is that it's a differentiator of how much respect you get that sits outside your control and has no real meaning. So gender is one, race is one, appearance, accent, ethnicity, all kinds of different things, physical ability, all kinds of things could be a marker of how much someone looks at you and decides to respect you that has nothing to do with your skills, your qualifications, but we give these things meaning. And so what we do know from, truly decades of science that has existed almost or even longer than my lifetime, is that all other things being equal, a man will be given more respect out of the gate than a woman. Now, that's changeable, which is why I like doing this work, is because there's a lot of things you can do. But that is one of the reasons that I wrote this, in addition to it being this audience that I care about deeply, and I can speak to from my lived experience as a woman as well. That's why I wrote it for women, is because women, and not only women, have an ascribed characteristic that gives them a status disadvantage from the beginning, which means they need to be more purposeful and strategic about overcoming that.
You mentioned before we actually got on, the interpersonal circumflex, which is sort of the foundational psychological problems or issues at play here. Sort of like a Johari's window kind of thing that pits, cold and warm against assertive and submissiveness scales, right? These two opposing axes. I'm not doing it justice, but maybe like you write about the likable badass is strong and friendly. Like the right. And so what is this combination and why is it so hard to be that person?
Right. So the circumflex, you got it right. It's a y-axis and an x-axis. So it's 2 dimensions and you can be high on both. You can be low on both, one or the other. And so one dimension is assertiveness, which is a host of characteristics that speak to your capabilities. Are you competent? Are you confident? Are you decisive? Are you persistent? If I give you stuff to do, are you going to do it well? And that makes sense. Of course, if I know that I can put anything in your hands and you will execute, I'm going to respect that. So it makes sense. More assertive characteristics you are seen to have, people like that. But the other one is the warmth. Do you care about people other than yourself? Are you going to use your talents to serve others, not just you? And we respect that too. And so that's where the likable badass comes from. Is likable is my catchy term for the warm dimension, and badass is my catchy term for assertiveness. And so it is a 2-dimensional space, which means, yes, it is possible to be both. We know this is true because we know lots of people in our lives, women or not, who we would say that is a very capable person who is very caring. I absolutely trust them with any task. And they are giving and honest and likable and enjoyable to be around. And that's the winning status combination. Anytime people believe both of those things about you, they are always going to have respect for you. So that's the science of respect, that respect is not a random idiosyncratic judgment. Now, there are times when we might respect someone who only has one of those things. That's possible, but that's not as surefire or guaranteed as being seen as both. If I see you as capable and caring, I value you. Why is it hard for people to be both? 2 reasons. Sometimes people who are in low ascribed status groups, I'll use women as an example, when you have, and this has been an area of research of mine in particular, when you show up with and someone says, I don't really respect you very much. Okay, let's say because this gender, is salient in their non-conscious brain. I don't really respect you very much. Well, then I fill in details and I say, well, what kind of person are you? And I fill in details that give you one or the other. If you are a low status person who doesn't control anything, then I see you as sweet and harmless. If you're a low status person who's in power, then I see you as aggressive and hostile and, bitchy might be a term that would be used if it was a woman. So that comes from status leads to these judgments, and these judgments also lead to status. So there's a chicken and an egg. So that's why it can be hard for people. But I want to add in one more thing, is the other reason it's hard is sometimes we, human beings, screw it up. And what I mean by that is, I know, you would never think. We screw it up. So there's this, okay, I'm going to give you a bunch of syllables and then everyone can forget them as soon as I said them. But this phenomenon in psychology known as compensatory impression management, okay? You don't need the term, but the idea is if I want to convince you that I'm really capable, so I want to convince you that I'm really strong on that vertical dimension, that assertiveness dimension. How do I do it? What the research shows is I do it by acting less friendly and warm. Because I think smart means not nice. And if I want to show up as really nice, I do it by minimizing my capabilities. That is a mistake that people make. And it actually, some research shows that men do that more than women. So this is not uniquely a problem that's unique to gender. But it's an idea that we don't realize that it's a 2-dimensional space. And we start acting as if it's 1-dimensional and we pull ourselves back when we didn't need to. So it's a combination of both. For some people, it's harder to get in that quadrant. And then sometimes we are just not trying.
That's fascinating. And I really liked that component of when you brought that stuff up in the book. And one other thing you brought out in the book is that there's not just one way to become a likable badass, that there isn't a formula that if I follow A, B, C, and D, that is how to do it. So how does one figure it out for themselves?
Absolutely. And that's what I do think gives me a lot of comfort in being able to advise people who have been traditionally disadvantaged in showing up differently, because it's not a situation of blame a victim and give them more work to do. It's about saying you can live your authentic best life. And with just small tweaks that you would actually enjoy, you could get better results from your audience. And so the idea is thinking about capabilities. It's use your talents in ways that help other people. And that is going to be a surefire recipe. So what are your talents? They could be anything. What do you really like to do? So I'll give you an example that's been resonating with me lately because it happened not that long ago. I'm speaking to a women's group. There's a woman in the audience who is, I describe her as the unofficial official, like Instagram documentarian. She's recording stuff, she's taking photos, but she's also a member of the audience. So I can't decide if they asked her or she's volunteered to do this. Okay. But she raises her hand in the session and she basically talks about authenticity and says, how do you balance doing what you like to do with getting other people to value you? And she said, here's an example. I really like being on social media. And I'm sure, I didn't look at her profile, but I'm sure she has one of these like impressive profiles that has all these things about what she ate for breakfast and, you know, what she's doing. And she's very active. She said, but a lot of people I work with are older and they kind of dismiss it as like silly stuff. And but I like it. And so I don't want to be seen as silly and not professional, but I don't want to abandon what I like. And I said, well, here's an idea. Why don't you use the fact that you're really good at that, because you clearly are, to their benefit? So if you have a lot of people like me who want to be on social media, but I don't feel like I'm skilled at it and I'm not going to learn. But if someone came to me and said, hey, Alison, I have a good idea, like for your social media presence, here's what I could do for you. I could take a couple of clips or I could spend a little hour helping you refine your profile. All of a sudden your silly thing isn't so silly anymore, but it's something you love and you're good at. So that's where I would tell people to start, is figure out what you're good at. And maybe you're good at like the fact that you know a lot of people and you can make good introductions. Maybe you're good at the fact that I was talking about when I was young in graduate school, we have to format academic papers according to a certain standard. Okay. Yep. It's just a bunch of minutiae rules, right? None of it's hard, but you have to memorize a book that's like this thick, or you don't memorize it. Otherwise you got to look it up. Well, when I was young in grad school, I needed to do it. I'm good at memorizing stuff. So I just memorized the whole book and I just knew off the top of my head what all the rules were. Wow. And all of a sudden, I became the person that everyone would ask every time they had to send a paper in, because Alison just knows all the rules. So if you go to her office, she'll just tell you that this font should be this size and move it over here and put it in bold font or whatever. And so it's the idea of just finding something that you're doing and then helping other people with it is really all it is. And if you think about that, that's an infinite list and it's highly independent to who you are and what you like. So I always say, start with what you're doing, start with what you love, and figure out how do you think about making that more valuable to other people.
It reminds me of a conversation we had with Linda Babcock at Carnegie Mellon. We're big fans of Linda and have known her for a bunch of years. But, she writes about non-promotable work and that really getting in the way of being something that can actually advance your career, that this non-promotable work sort of becomes the chaff that can sort of eat away at everything. But a likable badass is different. Being, I like the way that you're framing this idea of, I want to use my love for Instagram to actually help other people in the audience to sort of become seen as the expert, right? Am I reading that correctly?
That's right. And I apologize. The reason I cut you off is because I got so excited, because I'm going to lean out of my camera for a second here. I know most people will just be listening to this just to show you that this is how close that book is within reach to me.
Oh, there it is. The No Club.
There it is. Yes.
Right. So I love this. Okay. So, and I talk about it in the book. So I think the distinction is important. I'm really glad you brought this up, because I would say an example of giving somebody a ride to the airport or buying somebody a coffee. Those are nice things to do, but they don't distinguish you as capable in any way, because anyone could do them. And so I think the issue of the fine line between non-promotable work and making a valuable contribution to others is, does it allow me to show up as unique in a way that other people value? So if I'm doing something at work and it's like, we need someone to do it, but realistically, Alison, if it's not you, it could be any of us. You're just the fool that ended up with it. That's not going to be useful. And so I do think indiscriminate giving and just giving more and more and more is not going to be our path. It's thinking about what has value to other people that also is something that allows me to show up as capable and unique.
Yeah, you bring up in the book, you bring up a story, and I can't remember the woman's name, of how she started and she helped everybody with their PowerPoint presentations and bringing that. And to a certain degree, you could go, well, that's non-promotable work. I'm just doing this, hard work, but she brought an expertise to it from my perspective. Can you talk a little bit about that story and how does that play in? Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. So her name's Kate. And I met her when I spoke at her organization's conference. And I noted that even though she was very young, and she was clearly rising fast, and she had this role in the planning, and that the senior people that I was being introduced to all knew who she was and were talking to her in a way that you can just tell that they're considering her part of the inner circle. And as I got to know her over years of doing work with this company and asked her, how did you do this? And she said, look, I got a reputation really early on that I was a person who got stuff done. And she said, I basically was given a piece of advice that was poorly delivered, but helped me out a lot. So when I started, I get this boss who says, your job is to make my life easy. And she said, the delivery was not great, but I really did internalize that my job was to make other people's lives easy. Okay, well, how could I do that? And she said, look, the first a lot of things I did were complete wastes of my time, non-promotable work, capital N, capital P. She said, however, I didn't abandon the idea. I kept looking for things that were going to add value that I didn't hate and that people were going to appreciate. And so I got asked to help with a PowerPoint presentation, but she's pretty non-sexy. It was compliance training documents or something. She said, but she ended up having this split position in two areas of the business. And she said, because I was hearing two different sides of the business in my 50-50 job I had, I was able to think about how people in the other side of the business would react to what I was saying in the presentation and almost like cut off the questions by answering them, anticipating them and answering them in the slide deck. Was I making charts and graphs? Yes, but I was really telling a story. And the fact that I was willing to make the charts and graphs was a bit non-promotable. What people started to really appreciate was Kate can tell a good story in charts and graphs. And that means I, senior leader, could in 20 minutes, tell her, here's my goal that I want to have in this meeting. I want people to walk away believing A, B, and C, go. And that Kate could take that idea and run with it and come back with charts that looked pretty. So there was a bit of a combination. She was willing to do something that technically wasn't her job and was, you could come say like, below my pay grade, but she was able to then show how she was uniquely good at it. And that's what had started happening was anytime somebody had important presentation to make, it was Kate might help with that. Go ask her. And she said sooner or later, every single C-level person, I had helped them. And then if nothing else, they knew who I was and I had been in service to them. So it just started to get me in the door.
So is part of the trouble that we aren't so great at communicating our strengths and desires and abilities? Is part of it a communication problem?
Ultimately, yes, because if you think about this, that everything that somebody knows about you at this point in the world comes from only one of two sources. Things they got from you. So they listen to this podcast. They hear you say something, right? They read about you online. They have worked with you in the past. They sat next to you on an airplane, whatever it is. Things that directly came from you or things that originally came from you, but now have been repeated by other people. And so at the end of the day, if we don't tell, if people don't experience us at all, how could we possibly be respected? I mean, if someone was living on a deserted island, no matter what they were doing, there's no, there's a tree falling in the woods with no one to hear it. So yeah, it is a communication issue, which is, what I always say is in this book, in this book, or just in general, I do not teach people how to be capable or how to be caring. If that's your problem, maybe someone can fix it, but it's not me. I start with the premise that you are those things. You have skills of some kind, and you value at least some other people than yourself, not necessarily everybody, but some people. And at least in that group, you can be valued if you communicate well. And that starts with, one, am I putting information out into the world that allows me to be seen that way? And then secondly, the advanced level is, am I helping other people also talk about me that way? That's going to be multiply the effect, because if everyone's running around and, you'll be like a tipping point on someone's brand where you've heard about them and you've heard one person say something positive and then two people say something positive. And then by the 10th person that says, everyone's talking about this person, I still don't know. I got to figure out who this person is, because the person's clearly amazing because 10 different people have told me. That kind of multiplication effect. But it does start with us, right? If we say nothing, if no one sees us, no one ever hears from us, there would be no reputation.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating. And I love that the one title in your book is Recruit an Army of Other Promoters, right? You have that going on for you. I want to go back a little bit to the communication side though, because in the book too, you also talk about some bad storytelling habits that we have, right? This idea of concealing achievements, humble brag, rejecting compliments, self-deprecating, unnecessary apologies. And it's funny because I find that I have many of these, in particular, self-deprecating aspect. So I want to ask specifically about that. What is it about the self-deprecation that is negative? Don't people like me more because I'm self-deprecating and being that way?
They probably do, but at the expense of thinking you're capable. And so right. So the
well,
idea
that's
is
not hard anyway.
Right.
See, there you go. That self-deprecating part
So-
coming in. There you go.
Yeah. So self-deprecating is often funny. So I say like there are many comedians and their whole shtick is making fun of themselves on stage. So that's a technique for humor, and it can be an effective technique. And humor is also in itself a warmth building behavior. I like people who are funny. It can also build your capabilities because it's seen as a smart thing. But if it's humor that puts yourself down, what we see from all the research is we're considered the greatest authorities about ourselves. So when we talk ourselves up, generally speaking, people believe us. They might discount a little bit because they wonder if we're, exaggerating for effect. But when we talk ourselves down, people think there's no reason for you to do that unless it's true. So it's very believable. And so people are seeing when people, the research has shown, if you self-deprecate on a dimension, your attractiveness, your intelligence, and then people rate you, they see you afterward as less attractive, less intelligent, whatever it is. So they believe you. And I'm with you because one, I'm hilarious. And two, a lot of my comedy comes from being self-deprecating. And it has taken me to almost 50 years old to realize how much of that I did. Some of it I learned through this process. When I wrote the first draft of this book and sent it to my editor, the main feedback was, oh my God, you cannot write a book where you cut yourself down like this. You are an authority figure.
Wow.
And a lot of your attempts at being funny are all at your own expense. Like all of these things have to go, including the dedication that I had in the book. She's like, This is the first thing that people read. I thought it was hilarious. She's like, this is not good. And now I have a dedication, like it's like to my family or something very boring. So anyway, I was like, I don't know what to say. So I'm with you. So yes, self-deprecating, people will like you more, but at your own expense. Now, I get super agnostic on this as a psychologist. I say, do whatever you want in your life, as long as you know why you're doing it and what effects you're likely to get. You want to self-deprecate? Go for it. But recognize that a consequence of it is that people will like you, but over time they'll see you as less capable. And it depends. For people who know you really, really well, if your status is already really established, that's a different story. Because then your self-deprecating is probably not going to hurt you much. But when you're trying to build your status and people who don't know you as well, they'll take you at face value. And then I think you choose at that point, is this something you can and want to change or not? And if you can't or you won't, it doesn't mean all is lost. I apologize a lot. I talk about it in the book. I have always done it. I still do it. I've given up on trying to influence it, but I also know I can work around it and that I can leave that there. It's a signal of warmth. It does also diminish my capabilities when you consistently apologize for real or imagined wrongdoings. But what that means is I just need something else that allows me to show up as capable and assertive. And if you have something else, then you don't have to worry about your self-deprecation or your apologizing or anything like that. And that's that idea where there's space where no two people have to show up as likable and badass in the same way.
It's interesting because you just demonstrated this in your answer to this when you talked about I am super funny and hilarious. You stated this attribute positively in a way, and I think is one of those aspects that you talk about in the book is you are the best authority on yourself. And so by saying that, now I'm assuming that you are really funny, even if I've never really talked with you or had a conversation where we're laughing with each other, that makes that happen. And then you can probably bring in that self-deprecating humor in a whole different way of it won't diminish or doesn't quite diminish it in the same manner that it would have been otherwise. Is that what I'm hearing as well?
It's 100%. And I think that it's good to examine sometimes when you do these things. Well, what was my goal in doing that? So I've had to do a little examination on my self-deprecating behavior. Why did I do that? And I think not to be too clinical psych on this whole thing, but I think when I was a kid, And I was school, the way that we teach school came very naturally to me. My dad, as an older child, my dad was very, very worried I wasn't going to have any friends because I was young in my grade and I was going to be this very smart, successful, but like nerdy kid who had no friends. And so it was a very young age. My dad was always harping on me to like be nice to people and make friends. And so I kind of quickly started to associate, like, don't show off that you're succeeding in school in ways that might be hard for other people. So like I kind of just started to like downplay all of that.
Wow.
And it's fine in school because your peers don't really matter, right? As long as you're, getting the answers right, it's fine. But I kind of started having that. And then I also do like making people laugh and I want to make people feel comfortable. And so I started to realize that my self-deprecating wasn't because I needed to put myself down or I felt super insecure. It was my attempt, but perhaps not my best one, to show people that I valued them and also to be funny. But there's a lot of ways to be funny that have nothing to do with putting yourself down. You can, do all kinds of stuff. And there's a lot of ways to make people feel comfortable and not feel like I was like, sometimes people say to me like, oh my God, like you're like, they don't know me from something like you're a professor. You just seem like so chill and normal. And I think those things are complimentary. Like, yeah, I am chill and normal. And I think what they're saying is like, I thought you were going to be really like uppity and weird and you're not. And so I realized that the reason I was doing these things, there was a logic behind it. It had developed over years. It was a tool that I was using to try to achieve results. But I wasn't fully, even as someone who studies this, consciously aware that that tool may not be the best tool. And then once you start to think about those things, then you're like, maybe I don't need to do that. Maybe there's other ways that I can say I value other people. Maybe there's other ways that I can make people like me and feel comfortable that don't involve only putting myself down.
I love that. Thank you for that. That is pretty terrific stuff, Alison. I wanted to get back to Kurt brought up the Recruit an Army of Other Promoters chapter, and you spoke so affectionately of Kathy Phillips, the late and amazing researcher from Columbia, who I think she passed away in 2020 or so from breast cancer, but was inspiring in her work. Do you have a favorite Kathy Phillips story?
And I told a couple of them. I mean, what I just remember from one of my first moments ever meeting her was in Chicago. And this conference that is our major fields conference, as luck would have it, as you and I are having this conversation, this conference is starting again in Chicago today. She was graduating and I was her baby sister in academia, meaning that we shared an advisor. And so we call each other siblings. It's very weird. And so she's graduating. She's about to become a professor at Northwestern. I have just started to become a graduate student. And so her job is, as my advisor's next student, to kind of take me around. I know no one, and she knows everyone. And I remember walking the streets of Chicago, and it was like 3 steps, stop, wait for her to have a 5-minute conversation. 3 more steps, stop, wait for her to have a conversation. Wow, it must have taken us 90 minutes to go 2 blocks to a party. This is a favorite memory, to a party that was hosted by the University of Wisconsin that was in a hotel room. And there was a keg with ice in a hotel room bathroom. And I was like, what the hell did I just sign up for? And it was professors doing keg stands. And I don't know if that party still exists, but I haven't gone back.
Well, it was the University of Wisconsin. So, I mean, there you go.
It's right? Probably still being done.
It was amazing. And it was like,
anyways. Yeah.
So Kathy, but what was amazing about her was, we both got this from the same place. I think we were both very good students of my advisor, was that she was so smart about adding value to other people. And that was evidenced by the fact that when she was just still fairly new in her career, she's just graduating, she's about to be a professor, she has such a deep web of relationships. And I remember seeing this and being both annoyed that we couldn't get more than 10 steps and also really, really in awe of what she had built just through graduate school. And then I'll fast forward to like when not long before she passed away, she won an award. And at this point, I cannot tell you what it was, but she got to give a speech that I didn't see live, but I saw the recorded version of it. And she stands up and she gives a speech. And one of the things she said, and which I think about all the time, is she said, whatever you do, pour a little love into somebody. And I think that was how she really lived her life. And she did it in a way that was not at the expense of her own success, but built her own success. So that's one of my favorites, kind of from beginning to end of my time with Kathy, is how good she was at really like making friends by helping them out.
Yeah, pouring a little love into
Yeah.
every situation. Okay, we're already getting to some of these, but what are 3 or 4 simple things that our listeners could start to do or to think about to become a likable badass? What are some of the things that they can do, starting tomorrow or today?
Absolutely. So we got a whole list. I'm going to give you in no particular order. One I like is let's start practicing and getting comfortable talking about our successes. That is a simple thing we can do that, again, no one likes this idea of self-promotion. Sounds bad. However, it's one of those mistakes we make that we think is doing us a favor, but it's not. When you say, oh, doesn't everyone like me more when I self-deprecate? Doesn't everyone like me more when I don't go around bragging about myself? Well, I love this research. I can't talk about it enough. It's not mine. And it's brilliant. Is this idea that it's a logical thing to say, if something good happens to me, I'm not going to want to tell you about it because it makes it look like I'm bragging. So I'm doing it to build my warmth and my likability. But later, because we live in the world's most efficient grapevine right now. Later, when you eventually find out whatever my good news is, I won an award or I got promoted or whatever, is your first thought going to be, I just saw Alison. What a humble person for not telling me that. No one in the whole history of the world has ever thought that, right? You think one of a couple things, none of which are favorable to me. You think, does she not care about me? Like, am I not in the inner circle? Like that I wouldn't get to hear that. So therefore, we're not close. Or does she think I'm such a disaster that I'd be jealous or envious because I'm terrible and she's amazing? And so she was holding it for me because she felt sorry for me. So none of those things serve us well, right? So simply talking about our successes can be really, really helpful. And holding them back actually has this counterintuitive effect of setting us back. So that's one thing is doing that.
Love that.
Yeah. The second thing I would highly recommend. So my favorite chapter in this book is on other promoters. Like if self-promotion is promoting the self, other promotion is promoting other people. And I want for each person, them to have an army of people around the world that go and sing their praises. Because when other people say good things about you, it's super effective because they can be over the moon positive without it ever looking like it's immodest, right? They can just say you are the absolute greatest person they've ever met, and it's fine. And it's super effective. So we're sitting here, the three of us, having a conversation. Imagine if a whole bunch of people were running around right now telling everyone they could think about how awesome the three of us were. Like they're doing our work for us. So yes. How do we get more of those people? And so one of the things, and I outlined the whole thing, so I won't go through the whole thing here, but in terms of a specific tip, you might say, I am never, ever going to go around sharing my successes, Alison, like heard and rejected. Okay, fine. I stand by it. But here's an easier one that it could be just as effective. And I have a hard time finding anybody who's going to disagree with it. And that is you go around the world shouting from the rooftops the praises of everybody you think highly of. If you did that, it would, one, it's a great feeling thing to do, and it's the right way to live. And two, it is going to build your status. Why? Because human behavior is reciprocated. If I yell at you, you yell at me, right? If I open the door for you, you open the door for me. But if I go around saying good things about you and you find out, because you will, because the grapevine's efficient, you want to pay me back. And you don't always pay me back with the identical kindness, but many times you do. And so you've praised me. What am I going to do? I'm going to look for opportunities to praise you. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that we can mutually be building each other's status, starting with just saying good things. So I have a rule for myself. I always say, whenever I think something positive about a person, I do not let that thought die in my head. I find someone to tell, even if the someone is my husband, like at dinner. Someone, I put it out there in the world, because as soon as I say it, I have helped build that person's status. So that one, even for the most fearful self-promoter, I think is important. And then the last one I'll say is I always go with add, don't subtract. So what I mean by that is back to this whole compensating thing, is start with what you naturally do and what you're naturally good at, and think about what comes easier to me. Do I think it's easier for me to convince people I'm really, really capable and assertive? Or is it easier for me to convince people I'm really, really warm and likable? Whichever one is kind of your easier one, let it go. That's fine. You're doing well on that. And focus on how you could do everything you're doing now, but just add in something on the other dimension to showcase it a little bit more. And it makes that problem feel a little bit simpler. It's like, I'm me and I'm great. And if I can just like turn up the dial a little bit on the dimension that's a little bit less natural, I can be able to build my status without it becoming burdensome, inauthentic, time consuming in my day.
I love the incrementality of that. You don't have to drop everything that you've done in your whole life and start all this new stuff at the same time. It's very incremental, right?
100%. And I would say, even if you thought there were 50 things you would fix, I would beg you to only think about one. So I give the analogy in the book that came from a former student, and I always repeat it. She was a collegiate golfer, and she basically said it in the context of leadership. She said, in golf, we're taught, don't have too many swing thoughts. And I am not a golfer, but my family is, so I get what it means, right? Golf is just a maddening, very difficult game. And if you start to try to fix 10, 50 things in your swing all at once, you will be a disaster. So she said, the way they coached us was, you pick your top swing thought. What is the biggest improvement you need to make in your swing to be a better golfer? Mm-hmm. And you forget every single other one, even if you know they exist. And only when you feel like you have mastered that swing thought do they let you go on to another one. And we talked about that as a great analogy for thinking about just becoming a better whatever, including a better likable badass, a better human. And so that's what I always tell people is just pick one thing and the rest of them will come in someday. But nobody has fun waking up on New Year's Day with 763 resolutions. It's just, has that ever worked? It doesn't work. So it should be small enough that it feels easy and fun, because as soon as anything that I offer to people starts to feel like work, no one's going to do it, including me. I'm like, I don't have time for that. I have 3 kids. I got a job. I'm working on a shower every other day. So that's what I think. Pick a swing thought. Make it easy.
I love that. Before we started recording, we were talking just very briefly about music. And you said that you didn't listen to any music while writing the book, which I think is a fantastic idea, by the way. I think silence is a great way to work, even though I do love music. But I'm curious, if you were stranded on a desert island for a year, and you could only take 2 artists, collections with you. So you get to take everything that this musician has ever created, but you only get to choose 2. Which 2 would you choose to go with you?
Okay. I'm taking Zach Brown. Yeah, I love all things country, and I like a lot of different country, but if I could only pick one, that's and I'm on an island, so it feels very beachy. It's like as I sit there, Castaway style, like Zach Brown, and if I got 3, I'd put Jimmy Buffett in the suitcase as well. But,
I was going to say, there's I think there's a parrot head in you somewhere.
100%. Oh, 100%. And yeah, I'll say the very first Jimmy Buffett concert I ever went to, my husband's a big fan, was the first concert that Wrigley Field in Chicago ever allowed to happen in its confines.
Wow.
Yeah, it was in 2006, I believe. And we did not live in Chicago at the time. We flew in for it because my husband said, this is unprecedented. It may never happen again. And we're going to go see Jimmy Buffett. Now it happens all the time because they realized it was a great thing. So now there's concerts in Wrigley all the time. But we went to the first ever. It was Jimmy Buffett. And it was my first Jimmy Buffett concert. And I never will forget feeling like these are my people, because I was waiting in a beer line. and all these people in shirts with flamingos were like, after you. No, after you. It was the most polite, civilized thing. And then beach balls were going up. And I was like, this is lovely. You can't be in a bad mood when you're at a Jimmy Buffett concert. But I do love both of them. But I'm going to go a different direction for my second, because as much as I love the 2 of them, I feel like it's a little repetitive. And then I'm going to go the entire catalog of Bon Jovi, which just defines Alison from 4th grade through high school. And I love that guy. That's what we're going with.
Okay. Bon Jovi and Zach. So you're seeking a little bit of variety and novelty. You want to keep it diverse enough, right? It's not going to be all country. This isn't, WCOUNTRY, all country, all 24 hours a day. Okay. I think that's interesting. What's on your playlist right now?
Well, a lot of, so basically it's things my 9-year-old daughter introduces me to.
Mm-hmm.
So I am not a first mover when it comes to learning about these things. So what have I learned about? There's a lot of Taylor Swift in my life. There's a lot of Olivia Rodrigo in my life. There's a lot of Sabrina Carpenter in my life, which a lot of these people I have to say, who is that? So those kinds of things. But a lot of times my music is I learned about AJR through my sons, Imagine Dragons through my sons, so I am all the things I know. And we do go see a fair amount of concerts. I am a great customer for the 70 plus artist. Like I've seen the Rolling Stones, I've seen the Beach Boys, I've seen Elton John. If they're over 70, guaranteed I'm getting tickets. If they are under 70, I'm asking, who is that? And my kids are telling me. So that's what I've got right now. It's all kid driven. And me thinking about the fact that when I was growing up and my parents didn't know who any of these artists were and didn't care. And I thought my parents are so uncool. And now when my kids say the same thing, and I was like, oh, I get it. I'm just uncool. I really didn't think that was going to happen to me. I really thought I was going to be a cool parent, but nope.
It's interesting. I have a 18-year-old and a 14-year-old, and I am in the very same boat. I have learned more new musical artists because of my kids than I would just normally exploring. Whatever reason, even though I consider myself novelty seeking and I like different music genres and I like different things, they are listening to things that I would have never heard, have never listened to. And actually I start to like them. And then I wonder if I'm ruining my childhood experience, because now it's like, oh, dad likes these people, I can't like them anymore. It's like, oh, that, because I know I would have probably done that as a 16-year-old. It's like, what do you mean you like Black Sabbath? Oh, I can't like them anymore. Come on, there you go. So anyway, yeah.
I also think it speaks to the value of diversity in networks, like we know in behavioral science, right? This idea that even though I think I'm like information seeking and I've gotten a lot of perspectives on my own, all of a sudden you bring someone into my network who's different than me, in this case, different from age. And it's like, they're teaching me things that I couldn't possibly know. So yeah. Love it.
Alison Fragale, thanks for joining us today and being part of our network today and exposing us to all these wonderful ideas.
I love it. I could talk to you for days, and you don't have to say the same, but it is awesome. Thank you so much for having me here.
Our pleasure.
Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from our discussion with Alison, have a free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into our badass brains. You knew I had to go there. You knew it.
And it's a good place to go. I think that's a good place to go. Why not?
No, I didn't say likable badass brains, because I don't know if either of us are likable. But wait, I just did self-deprecation. I'm not supposed to do that anymore, right?
That's right. That's right. Give up on the self-deprecation.
There you go. Or be very purposeful about that self-deprecation.
That's right. In a way that will be additive to your persona, your status, and your power, right?
Yeah. So I just need to say, nobody knows like you're likable, Tim. So therefore, and keep it all focused in on you.
So it's not self-deprecating. Right?
It's just co-host deprecating. Isn't that how that works?
Totally different. That's totally different than self-deprecating. Exactly. Precisely.
Well, I don't think that's what Alison was trying to say either. However, it works for us. It is, it's interesting because I think there's truth to that. And it's funny. And I know we're going off of our outline here. But I do tend to self-deprecate a fair amount. It's a way of I think trying to engender myself and have people like me in various different pieces. And
the pratfall effect kind of thing.
Yeah. And I remember when I was the very first, session that I did when I was first president of my Rotary Club, and I gave my intro speech, and I did a lot of self-deprecating humor within that speech. And my wife afterwards, who was there because it was the introduction, and so she doesn't normally come, but she came, and she mentioned that. She said, "You need to stop being so, detrimental, and you do really good stuff, and make sure you talk about that." And it was a wake-up call. And so I know for the rest of the year I still did a lot of self-deprecating humor, but I also tried to marry that with saying, and here are the good things that we are doing and that I'm leading and that we're doing, all of those factors. So
yeah, just for the sake of self-revealing, it's always easier for me to talk about the work than it is me. I can sort of differentiate between the work that I do and the results that I've gotten versus the me part of it. And I don't know why that is, but
I so agree with that. It is one of those aspects. I can talk about how great the work is, but the fact that I played a part in that is
Yeah.
really difficult to talk about it. And I don't know if it's the Midwestern roots that I have that help drive that fear of saying, being that person who you don't elevate yourself up. That seems like bragging, and we don't like braggarts and all of those things. So I don't know.
I don't know either, but let me ask you this. What would you like to groove on here? We've got some wonderful conversation. We had a fun and great time, but a really wonderful conversation with Alison. What would you like to start with, Kurt?
So one of the interesting distinctions that she makes in the book, as well as in our conversation, is this idea of status and power, and that they are not the same. And that we often are striving to get power and thinking about power when we should be striving for status.
Yeah. You know what struck me about that is that this was not in an academic sense. Like, she wasn't trying to parse out a definition that we could use in an academic journal for the purpose of distinguishing A from B. She was using it because in the real world, we need to think about status more than we're thinking about power, if we're really actually trying to get to power. And this is, of course, especially designated and focused on women in particular. But I thought that was a really key thing that she was, focusing on. And by the way, it's not bad to focus on status. Or how much you're regarded or respected by others. That's okay.
Yeah. And with status, it's easier to gain power. And this other idea around status that I thought we didn't bring it up, but it's this idea that we are all striving for significance. The Arlie Kruger, right? Did I say his name right?
Kruglansky. Yeah.
Kruglansky.
Got the K right.
It wasn't even, I got the K right. Oh my God. See, that's where my self-deprecating comes from, because it's true. But there is this idea of striving for significance, and status is a reflection of that significance. That's what I took out of it.
Yeah. It's a fundamental human need. So yeah, let's just kind of go for it. We don't have to say that because you're striving for status, you're a bad person.
Right. Or you're a braggart, or you're any of these negative things that sometimes, at least in my brain, I get associated with those people who are doing status reaching elements. So what would you want to, so we talked about status versus power. What would you want to groove on, Mr. Houlihan?
Well, there is value in being the likable badass. I think that this is a wonderful way that she talks about this balance of warmth and likability with assertiveness and capability. This is a really wonderful model, I think, to think about, especially if you're new in your career. You think about, well, how can I get ahead? And you're probably thinking power, but think about status and think about how your warmth and likability is going to line up with your assertiveness and your capability. And those are developable skills. And so that was a really wonderful and pronounced message that I want to just reiterate.
And it doesn't have to be an either or. I think so many times, and Alison brought this up, is we perceive that, okay, I have to be assertive, right? I have to be assertive. And if I'm assertive, I can't be warm and likable. I have to be mean and cruel. No, they are not, polar opposites.
No,
they can be both and. So you can be warm, you can be genuine, you can be caring, and yet you can still have that assertiveness. You can hold people accountable. You can be very assertive in the messages that you're trying to convey and how you are communicating with others. And you don't have to be a jerk about it.
I also think that this is an idea that's going to take time to catch on. We are still working under these cultural norms, these social norms of men dominating. And because men dominate, that the women who are going to be successful are going to have to somehow copy a man's approach rather than really have their own approach, have their own authentic voice come through, their own warmth, their own assertiveness. And it's going to take time, right? But we have to engage it, and we have to start we have to start that change, because I think the future is so bright when I think about Alison's approach. I love how she kind of drives this idea that every woman ought to be a likable badass. And I think that that's a cool approach.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I would agree with this idea that we have a long way to go. And maybe we do. Maybe I'm being Pollyanna. I think that there is this opportunity that we can seize as both being, from us being men, male, and saying this is not how this world should be, and trying not to fall into those stereotype assumptions that we make around, if a woman is assertive, we label her as a bitch or some other, negative connotation around that, where we attribute it to a wonderful aspect of how this is a striving person for a male. I think we are at a point, and I think our society is hopefully at that point, where that is just so old school that it just becomes laughable to a degree.
Bring it on.
Maybe I'm being Pollyanna, but yeah.
That's okay. What else came to mind for you, Kurt, in our discussion with Alison?
This piece of that, hey, not only is this something that we can do, but Alison gives some very practical strategies for how to do this. And we didn't even cover all of what was in the book. So if this is of interest for you, and I have used, actually, again, one of the things that I always talk about is the value of these guests that we have on is when I talk to a client or somebody that I'm working with about the book, and I bring in some of these aspects. And there was a young professional that I was working with that was trying to get this concept, this element that she was working on across. And I just said, look at this book. Here is what you need to do. And you know, this idea of don't be shy about promoting this and how to go about doing that. But yeah, I really do like the practical applications that she talked about, you know?
Yeah. I like that idea about learning, getting more skilled at talking about your own successes more openly. Like, you know, like don't hide your talents under the bushel basket. You know, this is an old message. This goes back 2,000 years, right? So let's get the word out, basically.
Yeah.
It's okay to be a promoter, and then to do it in that with authenticity and warmth and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So promote yourself, but also make a habit of praising and promoting others. This idea of, oh, I will come off as kind of being false. No, this is one of the things that I took out of this conversation was I started to like identify those people in my life who are those people who promote and kind of recognize and praise in front of others, not just to me. Like, and there are a handful of people where I love them to death, and I go about promoting them partly because they're promoting me, but I also see the value that they bring, that I am viewed in a different light when they talk about me to somebody that we're being introduced to. Yeah. Because they talk about, my gosh, Kurt has done this fantastic work with me for the past 10 years, and we've done all of these things together and made all of these accomplishments. And all of a sudden you see that person who has never met you before, and you can see it in their face. It shifts. It changes how they view you. And, you know, there's something magical when that happens. And so I need to learn to do more of that. But I think it's also a very practical tip that anybody can do.
So I have a message just for the listeners, not for you, Kurt, but just for the listeners. I just want to
my ears and my
your fingers in yours. Okay, I just want to say you really need to pay attention to Kurt because he is such an experienced professional. He has such great work behind him. He's done fantastic stuff over the years. And by the way, he happened to be lucky enough to start a podcast with me.
My fingers didn't block that out, Tim, and so thank you. I appreciate that. But I would reciprocate, though. I mean, listeners, you have to work with Tim because he brings this wealth of experience from just practical application in the work field that makes so much sense and brings so much value. It's amazing. And he was lucky enough to start this podcast with me.
Okay, back to Alison. I wanted to say.
So what are some of the other practical tips that you thought were really important?
I love this idea that she talks about focusing on these small and incremental improvements. And this is just classic behavioral science stuff, right? We talk about goal setting. We talk about, sure, you can have your BHAG out there, your big, hairy, audacious goal out there, but you need to have these small bricks, right? To build your way, to build the path to get to that big goal. Or when it comes to habits, you don't have to start with reshaping your whole life. Start small, start with the tiny habits. I think that these are really common themes within behavioral science. And I love the way she applied that to just think about making a small adjustment and just try it out and do it. And in the book, she breaks it out in this really lovely way with saying, okay, here's something that's really easy. This is a super softball. And if you want to try something a little harder, here's actually a hard ball. And then here's the fastball. Like if you really want to go all out, then go for this. And I think that, first of all, the book is written really nicely, but I love the way she urges people to just try just a little bit, just find one thing, one thing, and just try to turn the knob on that.
And the last tactic I want to talk about is the one that I somehow can't seem to do. It's that self-deprecating. But I liked how we talked about this idea that you don't have to give that up. You just have to be purposeful about. So
when you use self-deprecation, right?
About when and how and why, right? Those are the things. And I love this idea that, there's no one way to become a likable badass, that there are a multitude of ways to do that. And this concept of saying, you be you, as my daughter always likes to say, you be you, but just be conscious of what you're doing. And if it is moving you towards the outcome that you want, then continue to do that, or reshift it and change how you use it so that it does help, or at least doesn't hinder you moving in that appropriate, way.
Yeah. Nicely done.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap this up now. Or grooving, or are we done grooving on this?
Well, I think it'd be a very likable badass move to wrap up now.
It's showing the warmth to our listeners that they don't have to listen to us anymore.
And assertiveness. Yes. Yeah.
All right. So Groovers, on a whole other note, we have been working hard actually over the past month or so on revamping our newsletter, or at least revamping a once a month version of it.
Yeah, we talked to people about finding their groove, and we have recently put a lot of work into thinking about how we could do that better. And what has surfaced, or what have come about this thinking and this discussion is, wait for it, a monthly newsletter.
Yeah, it's not just an ordinary newsletter, the one that we already are doing about our episodes, because this one will help you find your groove. So once a month, we are taking our normal weekly message about episodes that comes to your email box if you've signed up and done it, which provides not only a little recap of what the episode is about, but it gives you some tips and hints and maybe some definitions. So that's powerful. So you should get that one. Just, we sign up for that. But in addition to that, Tim, we're going to use this monthly newsletter to focus on insights and tips that will help you find your groove, listeners.
Yeah. So each month we'll just take a little bit of a deeper dive into a groove element and provide you with some key lessons to help you bring your groove to your life. It's just all additive. It's just all love. Or maybe not.
Oh, all right. And with that, folks, as always, thank you for listening. And we hope that you can take some of these cool ideas that came out of our conversation with Alison and use them to have a likable, badass personality to help you find your group.